Hey, how's it going, everyone? I hope you guys all had a nice winter break and a great start to your new semester. We're really excited for today's meeting. We have an amazing speaker for you, as well as some fun updates that I can't wait to share with you. So I'm pretty excited, and I hope you guys really enjoy the speaker. Roy is going to be joining us shortly. Until then, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the SVS initiatives that we have going on during this semester. I think Roy has joined us. Hey, Roy, how's it
I'm
going?
here. How's it going, guys?
All's good, can't complain. Um, we have just like about 1 to 2 minutes of updates, and then I am so excited to get started and pick your brain a little bit.
All good. I am on your timetable and not stressed about it at all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure.
So guys, this is our first meeting, our spring kickoff meeting. And we have here we go. Here's our weekly update, just for some tech news that we have going around. First off, Microsoft suspends donations, and the tech giant announced that they will not be donating for the 2022 election cycle, which is pretty crazy considering that Microsoft is following the lead set by a lot of other large, like conglomerates or huge corporations, in which they have all kind of opted out of this donation cycle. Next, we have Bumble. Bumble's date with an IPO. So the Bumble has been huge in the online dating market, and now they are set to um, they're set to IPO, especially, which is especially cool because traditionally this space has been run by Match Group, which is obviously the owners of Match.com, Tinder, and Hinge. And it's going to be really interesting to see how Bumble can do, even though they're up against such stiff competition in this market. And then finally, the future of Venmo. Venmo's parent company, PayPal, recently announced that it is planning on including cryptocurrencies and Honey integration in its acquisition of the savings platform. This is going to be your e-board this semester. We're all super excited and we're all there for you guys. If you guys need anything, please feel free to coffee chat us. And we're going to quickly go over the initiatives, and then we're going to get right into our speaker, Roy Bahat, and we're super excited for that. So, like, obviously, this meeting we have a speaker series going on this semester. We have a lot of great speakers lined up for you. Hopefully, they're going to all provide a little bit of a unique perspective. Everybody does something just a little bit different, but it's obviously amazing having the opportunity to learn from such industry professionals. We also have a tech recruiting series that we're going to help you guys kind of navigate the tech recruiting world. We have some amazing people on eBoard that are so gracious with their time. They want to see you guys succeed. So please get involved in that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later in the semester as it approaches. We have NYU Venture Competition. That is your chance to pitch to real VCs and really get involved in a VC kind of atmosphere for a little bit. That is a super cool activity. I did it when I was a freshman, and I highly recommend it coming up. We also have Venture Team and Startup Studio. These are our two mentorships that we're running this semester, which Venture Team is our kind of our flagship, but Startup Studio is brand new, and we are really excited because that focuses on entrepreneurship and startups and really learning about what makes a startup solid and successful. And Venture Team is obviously our generalist program where you get phenomenal skills that you can take with you for the rest of college and all through your professional life. Here's just a quick kind of curriculum that you guys can look at in the recording if you're really interested, and you could definitely reach out if you have any questions. And we're so honored to say that in 2019, we actually won Membership Program of the Year. The application process is still unclear for Startup Studio. Actually, I think both of them run on the same timetable. I think they're both opening on February 20th and closing on the 26th, and then they'll both have a round of interviews afterwards. And here's a little preview. Thanks, guys, for coming to this meeting. I know it's a busy time of the year, but definitely take a look at this and definitely reach out to anyone on eBoard or coffee chats through our website if you guys have any questions. And then here's Startup Studios. And next week, we actually have another speaker and Jesse Vaughn from Landon that we're super excited about. But I really want to just turn our attention to our speaker today because he has so much to say, and I don't want to keep him waiting any longer. So without further ado, this is Roy Bahat, and we're super excited to have you on, Roy.
Awesome. I'm thrilled to be here. So tell me like a little bit about what's useful to you guys. How do you want to do this conversation?
Yeah, so I have a couple questions lined up, things that I just want to make sure that I ask you and pick your brain about. But the rest of it, I would love to just kind of let you go off into whatever you are most passionate about, whatever you think that our club can take. Our club is really based on VC and startups and tech. So that's kind of your whole wheelhouse. So whatever you want to dive into, I'm more than happy kind of going off on a tangent.
Great. And just a logistics question, do you guys edit and rebroadcast this, or there like is there live conversation with folks? I only see 3 participants in the chat.
Actually, we have a stream running right now.
Got it.
Through YouTube, but then it will go into it will go into a recording, and that'll stay on our YouTube page, which is Strategic Venture Society channel. And I would send you the link after this conversation.
Okay, sounds good. Let's do it.
Yep. First off, I just, for the college students, I kind of want to get into your experiences immediately after college. And one thing that I saw on your LinkedIn is that you went into consulting at McKinsey.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us a little bit about your experience there, the skills that it helped you develop, and I guess some of the opportunities that you got from working in consulting?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it was a bit of a mixed bag. I'm happy that I did it because what I got from it was an extremely high quality group of collaborators, basically like people who I've come across and worked with and, done stuff with basically my entire professional life since then. Second, the standard of professionalism there is just so high in the sense of the quality of the work that you do. Like when you present something, you've really checked it. You have thought through all the different angles. You've agonized over like the precise wording on a bullet point. And sometimes that could be really annoying because I thought I had high standards going into it. But the repeated practice of being forced to have high standards is really wonderful. The other side of it is, the people they held up as role models were not role models. Like the head of the firm got in legal trouble. I remember in my first presentation sitting there, first training sessions, sitting there for a video presentation from the then CEO of Enron, Jeff Skilling, about the value of intangible assets. And we were being preached this gospel that turned out to be literally fraudulent. And so, I didn't take many lessons from the business substance of what I learned. I mean, honestly, McKinsey, although, I've seen them take responsibility for their opioid recommendations. Unfortunately, I never had to be involved with any of that. But, in general, they're making a PowerPoint presentation for somebody else. And so, I do think it's important when you leave college to try to find the absolute highest caliber of people who you can get to work with you. And I was fortunate that, in the beginning of the Bloomberg administration, that happened in city government. And it happened for me in grad school. And today, I honestly don't know if that's McKinsey anymore, or any of the like banking, like all the professional services things people go do. My sense is now that's actually a lot at tech firms, but I don't really know. You guys are closer to that than I am.
No, that was super interesting. So hey, well, you touched upon one thing that I want to kind of circle back on, and that's kind of like finding mentors. And you said that everyone else they kind of idolized these people that weren't necessarily the best to base your behavior off of. So what is your suggestion for someone going into work at a new firm and trying to find somebody to kind of shadow, mentor, whatever you want to say?
Yeah, I think it takes practice to find a mentor. I mean, one of my best kind of realizations over time has been how many things you believe you ought to just be innately good at that actually you just get lots better at if you assume you can. And so, I'll say there are frequent mistakes I see people make in the beginning. One is they accept who they are being told should be their mentor. And like most of the entry level people at McKinsey, they weren't like, oh my gosh, this guy Jeff Skilling is so amazing. It was the bosses who were the ones, putting him out there as a role model. Um, and a second version of that I often see is who's popular in the press or on social media. I can't tell you how many times I talk to somebody who's early in their career and their role models are just the people who are the most visible. And that's natural because like, okay, they're the ones you're going to see, but you got to develop a bit of a skeptical eye. And I would say it took me a long time, like a few years, to realize like, oh, this is what it looks like when you admire somebody. And one of the reasons I left McKinsey is that while I respected many of the people there and I thought I could learn from them, there was nobody who I like deeply wanted to emulate in any like, holistic kind of overall way. And when I got to city government, there were lots of people like that. Dan Doctoroff, who was the guy who hired me in, was, he had run a private equity firm for 15 years and then started on a project to improve the city of New York by trying to attract the Olympics. And he just had this like way of thinking about what the future would look like, and this ambition and this willingness to take risk and this hustle combined with like a very strong ethical backbone that I was just like, okay, that's what a role model looks like. Mike Bloomberg, that's what a role model looks like. The woman who was the chief of staff who brought me in, Sharon Greenberger, who now runs the YMCA of Greater New York. That's what a role model looks like. And so it took me, and there were many, many others, but it definitely took some trial and error.
How quickly do you think you can identify if there's somebody that you think you could have as a mentor?
Well, I don't think it's a forever thing. I think it's a phases of life kind of a thing. And I don't think that, so I don't think it's like you decide and then that's it, they're your mentor. I also think there's the other side of it, which is their willingness to mentor you. And that's the kind of thing that you have to, again, just trial and error. Like I had a weird thing where a guy who I was talking to who seemed pretty great was like, I have 3 mentees at any given time. And he just seemed to have this like structured relationship with them. And then I figured I'd go ahead and ask him. I was like, okay, can I be one of your mentees? And he was like, no, I just don't know you well enough. And it turned out that was fine because he wasn't my cup of tea. But that's an awkward way to do it. Like every other mentor relationship I've had has really evolved naturally from me trying to learn from the person. And the single best thing I think you can do as a person who's starting out is just express curiosity. I'm curious, why did you do it that way? And sometimes it's hard to ask that because it's embarrassing or overwhelming and you're not sure what question to ask, but it's important to just get in the reps, same way as going to the gym, you just got to practice.
I mean, that makes complete sense. And I just kind of want to get on to a new question that I think a lot of people are going to be really interested by. First thing, I just want to say, you might have the greatest LinkedIn profile I have ever seen. If anyone wants to go check it out, it is fantastic.
Thank
But
you.
on one of them, it says under the work section, you have unemployed and then in parentheses unhappily.
Yeah.
So can you just tell us a little bit about that, I guess, work experience in your life?
Yeah. I mean, look, there are times in your life when you're going to take a break intentionally, and that can be magnificent. I really, if you are in a privileged position to be able to do it, you should fucking do it. Pardon my French. Like, it's just great.
Awesome.
It recharges you and whatever. And then there are times, and that time was one for me, where you have a ton of energy and you're like, I just want to go. I want to do something, but you can't figure out where to plug in. And I had this thing of like, I knew I didn't want to continue working in government. I had some general sense of what I wanted to do, but there was no job that I wanted for which somebody like me had the perfect fit. So if I had sat there and thought, well, what should I be doing given what I've done, which is what a lot of people think. They're like, what does this make sense for me to do? I would have ended up either like doing government relations at a business or working in real estate. And it could have been okay, but it just wasn't what I wanted to do. And so it took me almost a year of like knocking my head against a wall and having one first meeting after another, everything from like internships to I interviewed with the then CEO of Time Warner to be his chief of staff and everything in between. And everywhere I went, I heard basically the same thing, which is, you seem like a nice guy. You seem smart. I don't know what the hell to do with you, so let me think about it. And then I would see that people would just get paralyzed trying to figure out what to do. And I dodged some bullets, by the way. Like at one point I was like, I'll just go be a first-year investment banking associate at Lehman Brothers, literally a year and a half before it crashed. So I definitely dodged some bullets. And I, by the way, also got terrible advice. I mean, one thing I'll just say is, just because somebody is a mentor who you admire doesn't necessarily mean that their advice for you is going to be valuable. There's a huge difference between the people who you can learn from by studying what they do and the people you can learn from by listening to what they say. And part of that is because I think, and I do this series on LinkedIn and Twitter called This Is Not Advice, which takes this to heart. It's like a daily Q&A with a question about work, which if any of your members have them, you could just find me on Twitter. My handle's right there, and ask a question. And I believe that advice is, it's usually a reflection of what the giver of the advice wants to believe. And that means they're either telling you to justify some choice they made by going back and reliving what they did, or they're telling you to try some experiment they didn't have the courage to try themselves, and they want to live vicariously through. Either way, it's about them, not about you. Somebody told me all advice is autobiographical, and I think it's totally true. So, it was frustrating. I didn't quite know where to fit. And then I realized what the core issue was, which is that I had a broken idea in my head of why somebody would hire me. I thought, well, they'll meet me, they'll hear about me, they'll interview me, they'll put me through my paces, and then they'll be impressed enough that they'll get over the fact that it's a risk to hire somebody who isn't necessarily a perfect fit for the job that you're hiring them for. And the kinds of jobs I wanted, like I wanted to work in like M&A at a media company, or ideally I would have wanted to own some responsibility for something, some P&L, but nobody was going to give me that. Or staff person to a senior executive at a media company or maybe a finance company. I wasn't sure. And I talked to JP Morgan Chase. And then I realized the mistake in my logic, which is the mistake in my logic is you can basically never impress anyone, I don't think, or at least I couldn't, enough that they're going to take real career risk on hiring you. Because it's just not worth it for them. It's too hard to predict. Nobody trusts their instincts in interviewing enough. And so instead, the thing you got to think about is, what can you do that would reduce the risk for them? And so that's where like techniques that I would have tried then, if I knew about them now, was like, I'll just start working on a project for you. Just hire me to do something that is like 3 months, a month, whatever. Let's see how it goes. And if it goes great, I'll just keep going. Or, what I ultimately did is I just said, whatever role, whatever title, as long as I'm here and I get to work with you, great. And ultimately News Corp hired me. And I don't think it's insignificant that the person who hired me at News Corp is the founder of the company. And so the founder often has the CEO founder who has the confidence that they're going to be in their seat can oftentimes take risks that other people can't take. And so finding a person who's in a position to take that kind of risk is another way that you can kind of change the equation in your favor. So that was when I was unemployed unhappily.
That is a fantastic story, and I think it's super interesting to hear about how you say that you can kind of mitigate that risk for them, and
Yeah.
really kind of put yourself in a better position than maybe you thought possible. Because I think most people just assume that the application process is the application process. You have to follow it. You do whatever it asks you to do. But I think it's interesting that you brought up that there are other options. You can definitely put yourself out there a little bit, and like you said, take a project. I think that's super cool way.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, in my experience, I've never gotten a job through a normal application process ever in my life. And I've tried and failed. Like Barnes and Noble wouldn't hire me to be the guy who like stocks books. Um, uh, you know, uh, I just think that um, the deck is stacked against you in that way, and that's where relationships really matter. And you got to work what you have. But most of the people I know have had an extraordinary career, not all, but most of them, at some point along the way, somebody said, you know what, I'm going to take you under my wing and I'm going to help you succeed. And figuring out how to create that kind of moment where somebody sees enough of the potential in you to be willing to kind of adopt you. That's one of the things you got to design for. It's like, go find a rabbi and get them to see you as their charge, but that's on you, not on them.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Um, One of the untraditional uh, kind of application paths you have to say is you started your own business. I
Yep.
guess that job you didn't necessarily get through recruiting. So can you
Nope.
tell us a little bit for people on the stream? Can you just tell us a little bit about your startup and kind of what prompted it? What was your inspiration?
Sure. So I never saw myself as an entrepreneur. I was not a person who was like constantly hustling of like, I'm going to start a new business. I'd have ideas like anybody else, side project stuff, didn't go anywhere. And then what happened gradually over time, as I spent more and more time around entrepreneurs, is I just started thinking more like them. And I'd have a project that I'd try to get going, and then it would launch and not go anywhere. And I'd try something else. And by the time I started a company, I counted, I'd started 19 different things. Only two of them had been worth, even gotten to the point where it was worth incorporating and creating some business around them. But the one that I ended up doing, it emerged very naturally. It's not like I sat there and said, I shall now start a company. What company shall I start? Although people do that and it can succeed, it just wasn't my path. Instead, like I had an idea. I tried to get my team when I was a CEO to do it. They didn't want to do it. They weren't that excited about it. Ultimately, I ended up talking about it with a woman who I'd worked with closely who left the company, and she was excited enough about it. She was like, I'll do that as an independent business. I'll be the CEO. I was like, great, I'll help you. Like, well, I'll do all this stuff. And she became my co-founder. And the company that we started was a video game console. The idea was that as mobile phones had gotten more powerful, the idea that you should have to spend $500 to buy a box that attaches to your TV just so you can play games on the TV and then spend $60 a game seems silly. And we loved the kind of video games where like just a few friends playing, sitting on the couch. We didn't need these like super immersive 100-hour experiences that are justified by the $60 price tag. And so the idea was create an open video game console where anybody could publish a game, just like on mobile, and you could have the fun of like the TV, which is kind of the fireplace in your home. And it was called Ouya. We went out to try to raise money. I learned some painful lessons. Like I had a bunch of buddies in VC. I'd been the CEO of a tech company. You would think that if anybody was set up to just like kind of just walk down the street and raise some money, it would have been me. And we struggled. We really struggled to raise money. And part of it was because I didn't quite get how much evidence VCs would want to see. They wanted to see more than just like, hey, this is a really good concept, especially for the amount of money we were raising. And it was before there were like pre-seed investors, and there were a lot fewer firms and a lot fewer angels, but still. And ultimately, we ended up having to raise from 29 individuals. So it was a friends and family and more friends kind of round. It was really challenging. We raised very little money, only enough really to get us to the point of being able to launch a Kickstarter, because we were like, hey, this was before there were lots of big Kickstarters. The first one had just popped. And at first we started joking with each other. We're like, hey, if we fail to raise VC, maybe we'll just go do this Kickstarter thing. And then week after week, the joke would get slightly less funny as we discovered that we just were failing to raise. And then one day, my co-founder, she woke up, Julie Ehrman, she now runs the LA women's soccer team. And she said to me, it was kind of amazing. She was saying to me, like, we need to do this. Like, we should do Kickstarter. I was like, why? She's like, well, because it's the only way to find out if our audience actually wants this or not. And it was like, wow, we can raise money in a way where we also validate demand. That's amazing. We should just do that. And then we just committed. And a little less than 6 weeks later, we launched on Kickstarter, and we ended up raising $8.5 million on Kickstarter, which was the second biggest Kickstarter at the time. We had the biggest goal of any Kickstarter other than some guy who wanted to record an album on the moon. Didn't get funded. And I remember even the night before, like, some investor was like, you're going to need 10,000 people to buy this thing for you to hit your target. And I was like, I know, but we just don't know any other way. And then 2 hours after we launched, 10,000 people had bought it. By the time we were done, 60,000 people had bought it. And then we went and like raised money from big VCs and 20 million bucks, and Alibaba got involved and like all this stuff. And it was the whole adventure. But yeah, that was the story. It sort of emerged organically in the sense that there was never a single moment where like, now we shall do a company. It was like one day we had a conversation, next day we had a Google Doc. Then before we knew it, we're like, you should really get paid. You're doing enough work on this. Okay, let's set up a company so you can get paid. Hey, Roy, like, I wrote the first check, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's like kind of crazy just to hear about that, that kind of funding route that you guys took. But it makes
every business has its painful path up the mountain.
Yeah, but it makes a lot of sense for at least the product, which is, like you said, it's important to kind of get a gauge on what consumers think, if they would have improvements. And I think that probably went just as long of a way to getting VCs on board.
Totally.
Having that, little kind of stash of capital, which is
100%. 100%. I mean, we were able to raise on almost 10x the valuation on which we originally wanted to raise, when we did that next VC round. And a lot of VCs who had passed were like, hey, let's talk again. And what was interesting about it is, this is an important note about VC or any business where you're where the occupation includes turning people down a lot. A lot of them just kind of ignored the way they had behaved before. They're like, hey, whatever happened to that meeting we got set up? It's like, dude, you ducked me 3 times. Like, I remember that. And for me, at least, I want to work with somebody who's consistent, who remembers their past behavior. And some people came back and they're like, wow, I really blew it. Like, I know we met and I didn't really quite get it, but now I totally do. And would you be willing to come back? It's like, hey, you owned your mistake. We all make mistakes. It was like just luck, in some ways. And so, yeah, of course we can continue the conversation. And one of the VCs who invested was somebody who had passed on the previous round.
Wow. That's even crazier. But it's definitely, it's an important kind of idea to get in general, that you can't forget your behavior, because definitely they don't forget your behavior. So,
and I would say that varies. Like, some founders are sociopaths. They have no empathy. If you're the right investor for them, they don't have the feeling of like, oh, you ditched me last time. And you know what? They have a match. There's some VCs who would be a perfect match for them. But it really does vary. And for me, at least, I'm more of like a New York style, old school. Like, I believe in handshake. Your word is bond. I don't walk out on things once I've committed to do something. I take that very seriously, even at my own expense. And, not everybody in the world is like that. I'm not saying it's better or worse. It's just how I am.
That makes a lot of sense. We actually have a question in from chat.
Yeah.
That's interested in the Kickstarter kind of deal. And Aditya said, what type of initiatives did Roy use on Kickstarter?
I mean, the secret for Kickstarter that we learned, and I don't know if it's still true today, but I think some of these are fundamental enough, is you want to tell a story that is immediately inspiring to the audience, and um, and you do it literally in the first 5 to 10 seconds of the video. And that's kind of the core of what drives this. And in our case, it was a narrative about like, you're sick and tired of like having to pay so much money for your Xbox game and not getting the fun indie games that you can play on a PC, on a TV. And so there was a hardcore group of gamers to whom that really appealed. And there was also a group of game developers to whom that appealed. And by the way, if we made one mistake, we made several, but if we made one, it was that we probably should have appealed more or less exclusively to the developers in the beginning, just to get them making stuff. I mean, they ultimately did, and we ended up having more games on our console than any other console ever. But I think if we overextended on promising something that was consumer ready, and that's ultimately why the business ran into some trouble and ended up struggling. And the other things that I would just say are third-party endorsement helps a lot. So we had lots of people in the game industry stand up and support us, including, by the way, some messed up stuff that happened, like people who were like, yeah, I'll give you an endorsement. And we, like the Notch, who started Minecraft, was like, you can have Minecraft on it. And we went with that because he told us we could have Minecraft, and he owns it and controls it. But then somebody on his team like kind of stopped responding and backpedaled. And so you have stuff like that. So that's one, is third parties. The second thing is making sure that you line up press and figuring out how to make it interesting, press or social media, whatever. Kickstarter doesn't generate awareness on its own. You got to generate the awareness, and then Kickstarter converts that into understanding, purchases, commitments, from customers effectively. And so those were the great secrets. And we probably put, I don't know, $75,000 into the video to get it just right, and a lot of time and effort in getting third parties to endorse us and getting press relationships built and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, that's just insane. It's insane to hear about like this path, just because obviously coming from a VC club, crowdfunding isn't necessarily the first thing that I think of when I think of funding, but I think it's honestly such a powerful tool if you like, if, really put a lot of effort into it. I don't think it comes naturally. Like, even if you have a great idea and you throw it on Kickstarter and you kind of just leave it there, I don't think anything's going to happen.
That's right.
But if you can really like hone that and like put a lot of effort in, I think it's a
Yeah, it
huge.
was a full-time campaign for 30 days. And I mean, look, there haven't been, mostly I think crowdfunding is usually a bad idea because the kinds of people who show up to do it are not the kinds of people you ultimately want, but it can work great, particularly in certain categories like video games. And, Oculus crowdfunded their first headset, and that worked magnificently well.
Yeah, I would like to. Do you think that more of these like mega firms or like some of the top tech firms are going to start trying that, like as a way to kind of reduce R&D?
No, I don't think so, because I think that the complexity of doing it and the risk you take in terms of your reputation is so high. And part of the essence of the reason the story is inspiring to people is because you need them. It's like if Google showed up and tried to crowdfund some new thing, it was like, the fuck do I pay you all this money for search advertising? Like, you spend your money. And so there, in our case, time and effort and reputation even were cheaper than capital. And in the case of a bigger firm, capital is cheaper. And so you should always use the thing that's easiest for you to use that accomplishes the goal. It's just, in our case, we didn't have any money, so we had to get inventive.
One other question that I have about kind of your experience there
Yeah.
is the experience of exiting a startup. Can you kind of just walk us through what that process is like?
Sure. I mean, I've now seen this process many, many times as an investor. Maybe this, we can shift to talking about me in my investment light. I would say with the company I co-founded, it was extremely emotional, like all the ups and downs. We ultimately got an okay outcome in the sense that it was fine for the team and the product, but not for the investors. That was unfortunate. I think we learned that if you have debt in addition to equity, then and you're low on capital, then debt effectively controls your company. And so that's the situation we found ourselves in, with a firm that it was just a struggle to work with them. And what I would say now is that there are many different kinds of exits that achieve many different kinds of goals. So like one of the first companies we invested in exited to LinkedIn for a modest amount of capital in the sense of like modern capitalism, like tens of millions of dollars. But each of the founders got enough to, retire if they wanted to just stop right then. And they were in their early 20s. And so for them, that was a great thing. And they got to see how LinkedIn did things. And, now they're at it with another startup. But that's one kind of exit. Another kind of exit is, you built something and it got a long way and it has some value, but then it sort of stops progressing. And you have these companies that could have 10 or even $100 million of revenue, and they're just trying to find a home. And that can be a very long dating process. It can be very maddening. And M&A is usually the only thing you can do. And then you have companies that are rapidly growing or have some insane technology advantage that makes them strategically essential to some buying company. And then what you often have is you have a question around just what does the founder want for themselves? Like, are they ready to get off the train? And and our goal as investors is to help those founders to figure out what they want for themselves and then to help them achieve it, whether or not it's like the optimal outcome for us or not. Finally, two or three other mechanisms. A lot of founders take a partial exit along the way by selling some of their shares in what's called a secondary transaction. That's become increasingly popular. I would say happens in most of the businesses we invest in at some point, if they raise later stage financing at some point along the way. That usually depends on how much money the founder already has. So if a founder started a previous business and they're already successful, they're probably not going to sell down their shares in this new company. But if they never made any money before, and this is the difference between like being able to afford buying a house and not, then yeah, they definitely do. And we encourage them to. It removes distractions for the business. At the most successful end, financially at least, you have IPOs. Increasingly now people are looking at SPACs, and that can be really exciting. We were involved in a very modest way in one IPO, and it's just great. You end up holding these shares that you then watch their value move with the public. Obviously, it's been a really good few years in the public markets. And then, of course, there is also the exit through, through shutting down the company or some hybrid of it. You sell the company to another startup and you end up owning equity in that startup. That can work out sometimes. Usually it doesn't, but that can work out sometimes too. So I guess my point in saying this is there is no one experience. It's a lot about what the founder wants. And there are many different mechanics for achieving an exit, even though the vast majority of companies do not successfully exit.
Yeah. That was a great transition to kind of picking your brain a little bit as an investor, because I know that is obviously such a valuable thing for our members to hear in a VC club. So, just kind of real quick, going from a founder to a venture, like to a VC, what prompted you to like really make that jump? And then how do you think your entrepreneurial experience now has impacted your investing experience?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'll answer the second question first, which is there's a myth that it is the substantive knowledge and the experience that's valuable. Like, how do you do X? How do you do Y? How do you do Z? And a lot of investors think experience is like wine, that it gets better as it ages. I think experience is like milk. It goes sour really fast. Like, I don't know how somebody should be doing the details of some aspect of email marketing automation. Like, they got to ask other founders in our portfolio for that. The thing that I do think it's given me is a lot of empathy. Like, I can often, not always, because there's always going to be chemistry issues and that kind of thing, but oftentimes, the very best founders, they don't always know how to express what it is they need. they oftentimes are suffering and it's difficult for them to say something about it. And when we can be there for them in those moments and give them either the confidence to keep going, one of the most valuable companies we ever invested in, the founders came to me after a couple months. They're like, it's not working. We're going to give up and pivot. And I was like, guys, you like barely started. Like, try this a dozen more times. You've tried 3 things, try 33 things, and then come back. And then it ended up working. And those, or moments where somebody's going through something really grueling personally, that could be crippling for the business. And so the moments we can be there for people when they are in the shit, which every great startup has those moments, every great founder has those moments, those are our greatest achievements. And our goal is not just to treat the founder as the customer and have them be in a status of like service and support to them, which is what we try to do. But we want to create moments for the company where we genuinely have a inflection point, kind of where we participate in an inflection point that drives the direction the company is going in a wildly positive way. And I think being able to empathize with founders is really essential to that. So that's me on that. Why did I do it? Honestly, real talk, it's way easier. Like, it's starting a company is an amazing experience. You have all this authorship, it's so exciting, but it was just grueling for me. And I would have started another company, and I don't know that I was looking to get into VC, but the Bloomberg guys who I'd worked with in city government, back to relationships, came to me and said they wanted to do a VC fund. And we ultimately designed what became Bloomberg Beta, and we're the first fund to focus on the future of work, the first fund to say that we wanted to focus on AI. Those were in 2013 and 2014, respectively. And we do things in a very different way. I mean, we are the most transparent venture fund. If you go to our website, you'll see it redirects to what used to be, once upon a time, our internal operating manual. Now it's been evolving in public for years. We try to predict who's going to start companies before they do. Like, we just do a lot of stuff that other VC firms don't quite do it the same way. And in some way, I mean, for me in the transition, I learned it's a really easy job to do, but a really hard job to do well. Like, I've never played golf in my life, but I get why a lot of VCs like golf, because it seems the same. It's like easy to do. Like, I could just go out there and swing a club and I'm playing golf, but very, very difficult to be great at it. Takes a lot of refinement and work and focus and concentration. And so that's been a big learning for me. And I'm still learning every day.
Well, that sounds awesome. And I think, yeah, I think people really appreciate that kind of transparency, especially because you know this better than anyone, but founders are like very emotional about their baby, if you will.
Yeah.
So they want to see somebody that isn't just in it for a money grab, but they really are looking for someone that can be like, all right, you've seen this before, I haven't. Is there anything that you have for me that you can help me out?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope. And the hope is that there are enough founders who see it that way. I'll say that different founders see things very differently. I actually discourage when people think of it. I mean, I know you're using the expression, it's their baby, but sometimes you can get this identity fusion that's really damaging. Like, it's like if your startup doesn't do well one week, you're not a bad person, but a lot of people feel that way. And they're humiliated, they are in shame, and that's just pointless. It's just like, it's only work on some level. I mean, it's important, don't get me wrong. And in some cases, there are literally life or death choices. And Robin Hood and the situation with the guy who sadly killed himself is an example of that. So I'm not trying to diminish the seriousness of it. And there's, economic justice at hand. So there's a lot of serious stuff that is at play. But from the perspective of like ruining yourself over your commitment to your startup, no. And then the other thing I'd say is different founders look at things differently, which is why we have a diversity of perspectives on our team. I'm the only white male partner. We are very focused on trying to make sure that we all see things differently. 2 of us are former founders. One of us worked at a Sand Hill Road VC before. We have different personalities, introvert, extrovert, hard-edged like me, a little softer gloves, some of the others. And our hope is that a wide range of different founders who we're aligned with them in terms of the values they want are find somebody on our team who they really click with, and it's not always going to be me, or not even often going to be me.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that a lot of people, founders, especially maybe non-white male founders, would appreciate that diversity in the room, because I think it does speak to
You know what's interesting about that though, Joe, is so first of all, I don't know, like I can't speak
yeah.
for a found, being a white guy myself, but we had a guy who's a white man who wanted an all-female cap table. And that's why, so I think it is as important, if not more important, for people who have fully represented backgrounds, straight
Yeah.
white men, to seek diversity of perspectives, because, they need it more than anybody. And, this guy showed up, and, we won in part because, my partner, Karen Klein, who's based in New York, and we're an equal partnership, because she was driving it. And so, it's not just the myth that only found, it is true that founders from underrepresented backgrounds often seem to want to express seeing others who share certain like life experiences with them on their cap table, but it's not only those. It really has become everybody.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, I want to get to some questions in the chat, because I
Yeah.
think a lot of people are really
Yeah. I
gonna
got
get
about 10 more minutes before I got to run.
that. Sounds great. First one comes from Sebastian, and he says, how do you deal with the loss of control that comes with bringing in investors, and how do you deal with the frustration when the strategy or ideas for your venture don't align with what you planned? And I believe that's kind of going towards your entrepreneurial.
Yeah, the founder perspective. I think but although it also happens in an investor, because we have later stage investors who come in, the answer is every new investor you bring in has almost no ability to shape the company, other than they have the nuclear button and can ruin the company. They could make your next round of financing impossible to get. They could refuse to sign papers going along with an acquisition. And regardless of what the legal documents say, I promise you, any investor who owns a single share can ruin your company. They can just harass you with endless distractions. And so the first thing is to try as much as possible upfront to diligence what that investor relationship is going to be like. And there's a reason I like working with frequent investors, because it's easier to find out what they're going to be like. It's more predictable. You can talk to lots of people. It's one of the advantages of being part of a tech ecosystem. And who also understand what you want and what you want to do, and that you're upfront with them. I mean, the worst thing is when founders present some story to an investor, and I just heard a story about this yesterday, and then somebody 2 months later, the founder 2 months later is like, oh, by the way, this thing is a big issue and we've known about it for months. It's like, well, what the hell? Why didn't you tell me? And the reason is because they were maybe afraid of losing the deal. But you'd rather lose the deal and be honest and be on solid footing than not. Now, tough talk if you think your company's going to go out of business, but it's that fear that often keeps people in a dishonest place, and it is almost always counterproductive. Like, you think you're going to hide it for a bit and you'll figure out some solution and you'll make it go away before they know. Usually it doesn't work that way. Much better to volunteer the issues. And then um, uh, and then, and by the way, I've written on my blog, which is just roybahat.com, if you go to it about how you should diligence a VC. And the answer is a lot of diligence, way more than if you were diligencing somebody you were going to hire. And because you can't fire them. Like, once you get your VC investment, that's it. It is a marriage from which divorce is very rare and very painful. And then in terms of, as a founder, how do you deal with it when things evolve? I think the question is always why it evolves. Sometimes it evolves because some partner of yours stabbed you in the back. Well, that's really painful. Sometimes it evolves because your initial guess about what the world was going to look like turned out to be wrong and you had to try something else. And so I think it's really important to have an honest, one of the paradoxes of being a founder is you both have to be irrational, in the sense that you have to do things where the odds probably don't pan out, where you bring a outlier high level of determination to it. And at the same time, you have to be really clinical. Like, you have to be able to look at the facts and be like, this is just not working. Let's change now. And here's why. And some of the best founders are, Jeff Bezos has this line where he says, smart people change their minds a lot. And that's how they're right, is because they're not too wedded to their past views. So consistency with your past self, it only matters to me in the sense of values. And if it matters to you, then it matters to me. But otherwise, let stuff go.
Definitely. And I love that quote. I think that's a great quote. So we have another question from Sebastian. That was a great question.
Yeah, thank you.
And James has another question.
Any women asking questions, by the way?
We have one that I
All right.
can ask you real quick right after.
Okay, cool.
If you're still following the gaming startup community, what innovations or companies do you think will take the lead as the future of gaming?
I have to be honest, I barely paid attention. Once I got out of gaming, I like gaming personally, but I never wanted to make my career in it. I have a lot of respect for game makers. It's a fascinating industry, but I can't say I've played close enough attention. I mean, other than to state the obvious, which is Discord is the single most important thing that's happened to games since Twitch. We helped with being a partner in the original launch of Twitch, which came out of Justin TV, and so that dates me a little bit. But VR, I don't feel like has lived up to the hype yet. It's fine, it's fun for a little while, but it's not like wildly anything yet. And then it may get better, but I think that's my general sense of things.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, especially for VR. And then Amanda has a question. Have you ever known a startup to not reach an exit, either maybe traditional or untraditional, and then what happened?
Yeah, I mean, every startup eventually must exit in the sense that everything that's born must die someday. But there are many that don't, like many end up going on as a quote unquote going concern, and meaning they're profitable and yeah, we own a piece of it and they're growing, and sometimes that's great. I mean, we have a startup that we invested in years and years ago. They struggled for a long time and now they're profitable and growing, and we'll see where it goes, but the founders are happy and it's a valuable thing, so I'm happy. Then you have ones that are what the so-called Walking Dead companies, and the Walking Dead companies they're sort of like, they're not really doing anything yet, but they haven't admitted that they've shut down. They have no cost. Maybe they have a little bit of revenue, maybe they don't, but they can't go anywhere because they don't have enough resource, whether that's founder attention or capital or something else, to go for it. And so they're just kind of in stasis. And usually I recommend to people, like, just shut it down. If it's not, don't keep it around for your investors if that's why you're doing it. If you're done with it, and it's distracting you, shut it down. And eventually founders do.
I think that's that's interesting. I actually have never heard of the Walking Dead.
Yeah, it happens with a lot of very early companies. I think it came out of like early Y Combinator classes where a lot of those companies for years afterward were just like nowhere to be found. And it's not like being in YC, is some guarantee that your startup is going to work. And I just say, with any of these questions, if anybody listening to the stream or otherwise watching a recording later, if you have another question for me, if it's something general, we can take it on This Is Not Advice, and meaning something you think may apply to others. Just ask me, but just DM me. My DMs are open. You can see my Twitter handle. I'm pretty easy to find on the internet. The only thing that I don't do is I won't accept a LinkedIn connection request. You can follow me, I think, but I won't accept a connection request. I'll only accept a connection request if you're somebody I know well enough to ask you for a reference on somebody else. That's what I use my LinkedIn connections for, like an intro to a customer or something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I also dropped your Twitter handle in there, so if anyone needs it, it's already in there.
Great. Thank you, Joe.
We have one. I want to be respectful of your time, so we could just kind of wrap.
One more
question. Maja asked, as a founder, how do you balance between being passionate about your vision versus being delusional, and how do you know the difference and when to stop? That's a great question, Maja.
It is an awesome question. I actually did a This Is Not Advice on that question with a guy from the Long-Term Stock Exchange, which is a project trying to create a new stock exchange with longer term incentives. And what he basically said is, the first thing is, and he had a great answer. He said, increase the speed with which you can find out if you're wrong. Because the longer it takes to find out if you're wrong, the more committed you're going to be and the more resistant you're going to be to facts. And I think that ultimately it's sort of like asking, it's sort of like I love to cook, and it's sort of like asking like, when is this dish finished? And the answer is not too early, not too late. It is a timing and dosage question, which you can only really learn through, again, practice. And there are often aspects of your vision to which you can be committed over the long term, and some aspect of it that, oh well, I thought we were going to do it through a mobile app, but that hasn't worked. Maybe we need to do it through a website. Maybe we need to do it through an email product. And so figuring out which are the pieces that you can be firm on because they're a matter of like deep personal belief, and which are the ones that are just guesses about how the universe is going to unfold. That's the paradox of being a founder, is holding tightly to some and loosely to others in a kind of ever shifting symphony that you're playing.
That's awesome. Chat, great questions today. We were
Yeah,
all
really appreciated it.
Yeah, we were all super appreciative of you and your time, and we were excited. We
Yeah,
were
it's great to
excited
come in.
have you here. And if you ever wanted to come back, we would always love to have you back, because I can ask you questions for days.
I love it, Joe.
All the
Thank
different
you.
experiences that you've had.
Thank you. It's really kind of you. Just keep hitting me up with questions, and good luck to the group. I love that you are also aware of what you're interested in, and I'm easy to find on the internet. And by the way, goes without stating the obvious, but let me just say it anyway. If you know founders who you wish to have, an investor like us, and you think they're great, look us up and send us word about them. We'd love to hear from you.
It's awesome.
Hang in there.
Everyone, he's on Twitter. I put the Twitter handle in the chat. If you wanted to go check him out, definitely do it.
All right. Awesome,
All right,
Joe.
thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
Roy.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, guys. That was an awesome conversation. Roy is clearly a super down to earth, awesome guy. He has some crazy experiences that really add a lot to what this club means and what this club studies. So it was so cool to have him on. I want to thank you guys for asking some awesome questions. I want to thank you guys. I think he was pretty impressed by our level of understanding, what we found interesting, and hopefully someday soon we could have him back on. But we do also have a lot of great speakers coming up this semester, so use those question skills moving forward. And if you guys have any questions about any of the initiatives I talked about, I know I ran through them really quickly. That's because I didn't want to keep Roy waiting too long, but definitely reach out to us. You can find us on, you can find our email on our website. You can find coffee chats. You can DM our Instagram account. Really, any way that you guys want to get to us, whatever's easiest for you. Ask us questions. We will answer. And we're just excited for this semester. It's going to be a great one. I'm personally, I love all of our initiatives, but I'm super excited for our new one, Startup Studio, that I know is going to be amazing. It is run by Lily. Lily Zhang is a fantastic member of our e-board, and I know that everyone is going to love to learn from her as their leader. So yeah, there you go, Lily. You got a little shout out. All right, guys. So I think that this stream is done. Like I said, if you guys want to go back and quickly kind of scan the top, like the beginning of the stream, that has some of the information on the slides where you can kind of find out. Also, this information should be on our website that you can find. Everybody have an awesome week. And next week we have Jesse Vaughn and Landon. So everyone take care.